I believe it not only because the Bible has it first place in the Bible, and it unfolds around the origin of that material from the creator of it. And when you get rid of him, then all the other categories fall in, and that's what happens in the Enlightenment, in modernism, postmodernism. You've got rid of him and the creation of the universe. You need him to explain the universe. You don't need him to explain finite things. I didn't understand all that argument about design in the first place, but I knew I wasn't too smart, but I didn't believe that in the first place. But when I saw that creation was the heart of the discussion, I say, can you do that with creation? Because if you could explain the universe, the periodic chart, what's on the periodic 240 or 50 items, and most of them are very complex and they're non-replicating. How do you create new elements in the periodic chart, and most of them have a lifespan about a millionth of a second? Well, that requires something larger than your shirt or something finite. So don't bring up these trivial things. I don't even know this is art for high school, but because then they get learning debris, and they get enough debris when they go to church. But design, I want to ground that in creation. That's over science. I can't help that. I didn't do it. You can blame me for anything you want to, because you're out of work when you do that. But there's where it starts. So don't give me any finite examples of not needing God. From the get-go, when I first, hundreds of years ago, for most everybody, now my precious wife, Dr. Kirko, was barely born, see, when I first encountered these. I didn't believe them then. But it wasn't over liberalism. I said, this makes no sense. And it still doesn't, but it makes sense when I start here. It doesn't make any sense when I don't start here. See, I agree with that. I think Christians should be as honest as anybody. See, if you can't start here for some reason, then there's no point in me talking about these things. Because it's just information, and you get A, and you get A in nothing. It's useless information. But if it's about all of reality, that seems to be the most exciting thing that I can imagine in people's educational experience. But education is to get a job and be wealthy. Some people say be beautiful, but see, I've never expressed that at all, because I have not the slightest possibility of beauty. So that doesn't bother me. My self-image is not annihilated by that actual state of affairs. But wealth, beauty, and success, those are the dynamics of the youth culture. And most people aren't beautiful, most people aren't successful, and you don't do what? That's another implication of the Enlightenment. What? You don't stay young forever. You turn your head, and it's another world. Oh, I remember when. But you see, the whens, you run out of whens. Well, anyway, Enlightenment. Another thing that happened in the context of the Enlightenment in Christian civilization was a conscription came from the French Revolution. You had a professional army. Prior to that, you did not have a professional army. You didn't have a professional police force. Hear that? You just had rebels that carried muskets around fighting. But then you had a real army and a real power structure to protect the institutional structure of the culture. So conscription was a matter of fact in the context of the Enlightenment. Foreign policy, they moved from local autonomy to foreign policy. They were concerned with the world. They were not just concerned with our world. And you know, Europe was one, and I remember saying that there was the Dark Ages in church history. A Catholic, an informed Catholic, said, they didn't shake their head and said, I feel so sorry for it. Dark Ages, we had peace and we had solidarity. What do you mean Dark Ages? Well, the dark, they said the Catholic Church kept that unified. Well, technically it did. So Dark Ages came when all that structure of unity collapsed. You can have unity in a culture, civilization, either by force or by conviction. There's no other way. That sounds like a high school sermon. By force, you can demand it the outside, or you have to be convicted about it. That's conversion. Two sources. I'm committed to that. You don't have to watch over me. I believe this. Well, that's conviction. Or you have to intimidate me. And to intimidate me, you're going to have an official police force. You're going to have official. That's what happened in the Enlightenment. They got conscription for army and police. They never had any official. What we know is a police force as an army. So what does that have to do with the Enlightenment? And they turned to foreign policy rather than local politics. What does that sound like to you? And the new God is man. That's where you get the development of humanism. We don't have God. Man is now God. Now why? Because science demonstrates human capability of attainment. He's a marvel of creation. And that's fine as long as everything's positive. But what do you have in the development of the Enlightenment? Wars all over Europe. Well, how do you relate that to solidarity and peace? How do you relate perpetual large strife, not just some rebellious child off someplace, but whole structures of society is collapsing right before our eyes. And Christianity seemed to have no power, like it did in the first 4 centuries of its life. It transformed every social structure in the Greco-Roman Empire, positively. Then it fell apart, because they became unconcerned about once it's settled, it doesn't need to be resettled. But it's a warning. Don't think that it's settled, because tomorrow we'll be back with the same problem. It's never permanently settled, not in this life. Well, anyway, the Enlightenment.
Doc?
Yes?
We're going to have just about maybe 3 minutes before I have to change tapes.
All right, just one thing, and then I'll stop and you retape. Now, reality is seen as basically impersonal. What's that mean? Reality is nothing more than modified structures of matter. And who deals with matter? Chemistry, physics, all sciences do. And who deals with science? You don't turn to the church, you don't turn to the preachers, you don't turn to the university religious people and say, now solve this problem. Who do you turn to? Well, you turn to people that have some understanding of what the cause of the situation is. Well, it's out of the hands of the church is the main thing in Enlightenment. So each one of these categories, dozens more, but these are enough. Each one of those remove God from categories. And then after you get rid of God as creator, then you will have no place for incarnation. You can't talk about the incarnation without dealing with the God that created the universe. That makes no sense without that. So that's pretty heavy stuff. Why unpointed Hebrew is what you need to be saved. No, I'm not talking about that. See, I'm talking about being aware of the biblical foundation of the discussion.